Hello, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. I am Rasul, and I am with Mr. Martin Geddes, and we have done two. This is Vanguard Visionaries, by the way. I have channels by that name on YouTube, on Rumble, and also on Telegram, and which is a group on Telegram actually. And I have two channels on Telegram as well. I have been involved in what I suppose you could be called the truther movement for quite a while, solidly for about 15 years. But I came from it from more of a spiritual background and approach, and still am, very much so, more than ever. And I ran into Martin when he started coming out with his posts on the 17th letter of the alphabet material, military intelligence dissemination program, as some people call it. And he has written much on that topic. And lately, in the last couple of years, he has gotten into the human law systems of primarily the United Kingdom, and has written a lot of very penetrating, incisive, deeply researched material on that convoluted labyrinth of systemic oppression, I suppose you could call it. But lately, on August 28th, he came out with an article that I found extremely intriguing because it's more aligned than any of his previous material, which is all brilliant, of course, and I highly recommend it all, on the connection or the possible connection between the system of human law and the Great Awakening to our actual divine spirituality and our actual, how should I say, true identity in this multiverse. And so I scheduled a show with my friend Martin to discuss this topic because, to me, it's such a fundamental topic, especially at these times during what is called the bifurcation of humanity and, of course, the Great Awakening. And what the concepts in this article deal with, from my perspective, they open up a completely different perspective on how to view all of human law, maritime law, and all these common law, civil law, and all these different systems that we've had oppressing us for so long. And it leads to the question about why. What was its purpose? What is its purpose? And what is our purpose, actually? So with that, I will turn it over to Martin, who can further introduce himself and talk about his article, begin the discussion on Are You a Spiritually Alive Child of God?
Wow. Okay, so if I introduce myself first, my background is as a fairly heavyweight intellectual in the computer science realm. And I rather unexpectedly found myself as a truther in the telecoms industry, doing quite intellectual stuff around the algebra of telecom network performance. But I didn't realize at the time that what I was doing was exercising a spiritual muscle in the search for truth. And honesty in that realm, and the ability to withstand collective disapproval for coming up with paradigm change kind of ideas. Well, other people came up with the ideas, and I was helping to promote them. I started to apply my thinking toolkit to geopolitics and our favorite military intelligence back channel a number of years ago. I got thoroughly punished and persecuted for it, as you might expect, being deplatformed all over the place. And I did publish a book. So it's not to promote the book, but to highlight the title of it, right? Which is Open Your Mind to Change. which was about getting ourselves to this era of mind control and brainwashing and programming. But I was still located largely in an intellectual mindset. Over the last few years, as we've been through this kind of interregnum period, uh, I've been more, sometimes not by choice, I've been forced to engage with the world. And I've got this pile of folders from all the various legal cases that I've been involved in. It could be about television licensing and the county council and Newcastle City Council clean air zones and transport for London. I've got a few more on the floor. And I've been off into court. Only one of these is one that I initiated. Otherwise it's people chasing me for money in the debt slavery system, and me saying no, thank you. And I've also been helping other people, and it's been a great learning experience. But in the last, I've done a couple of years of that. It's quite stressful. It's not fun. You're often dealing with judges and lawyers whose heart is not in the right place. So in the last year or two, I've been finding myself increasingly trying to find a bigger toolkit to work with. And the spiritual toolkit is the one that addresses more and more of these issues. So as by accident, I happened to pick up I didn't realize I was doing it. When I wrote some notes for this talk today, I picked up Spiritual Solutions to Worldly Problems. It's a talk I gave a few months ago in Scotland, because I'm realizing that that you can only get so far with addressing these issues by researching the law and refining yourself in that way. That there's something deeper going on. And what led me to write that article was the experience of going up to the Isle of Skye in Scotland and watching 4 people being immersed. Now, the word baptized has certain connotations to it. To put that to one side for a second. But they were being immersed with the intention of being in covenant. Okay, what does that mean? And it was an amazing experience. I was just there as an observer, because of a whole bunch of religious abuse as a child. I'm very slow to engage with some of these things at a personal level, but I'm there to watch and document and understand. And the process has taught me a big whoa aha moment. I wish I knew this earlier, yeah. Which is about what's happening in the courts in body and mind versus what's happening in spirit. And the aha is, I can deliver it up front. It's so simple. You go, hang on a minute, we can't have missed something this simple, yeah. But actually, we have, and it's out there. It's in the Bible, right? It's not new, which is that the courts are administering us as if we're dead, because in spirit we are, most of us, yeah. It's and we've confused being alive in body or mind with being alive in spirit. And the difference really matters. You go, it isn't. I've got my little red ink thumbprint pad, for sending off legal documents. And look, I'm a man, I'm alive. Well, actually, that isn't it. Yeah, that just makes me kind of a messy slave. Yeah, and you've got all these noisy, messy, kind of smelly slaves going around saying I'm a living man or a living woman, but that's only in mind and body. And that realization that the difference is everything was critical. And the covenant thing is not about God's law as such. It's about the absence of law. Yeah, at least the absence of man's law. So I had that aha moment, and I wrote an article about it. And I think it's a transition moment, because it frees us from having to fight those battles in that way in the world.
Yes, actually, so I'll just like to make a couple of comments on my own personal experience regarding that. I discovered that the key to true freedom and inner peace was exactly that, was spiritual freedom, spiritual awakening as to who we really are, truly, as spirit, as souls, not as meat sacks, running around with these crazy egos that are just concerned about, material possessions and our relationship and, reproduction of the body right? Of the, et cetera, et cetera. So I figured that out quite a while ago, early in my own personal great awakening, and in the past few years, actually, it has been proven to me to be actually the case that, as you posit in that article, is that the spiritual awakening is what is paramount and the most important, because actually the spiritual awakening, of the personal spiritual awakening, is what leads to your physical freedom. Spiritual freedom leads to physical freedom. It's not the other way around,
Yeah.
which is the way we've been taught, we've told, brainwashed, whatever, to see it. In my own personal case, 2 years ago, I really had to let go of everything on the physical level, and that led to my and go fully into what I guess you would call spirituality and a spiritual perspective, and full identification with my higher self, inner self, God self, whatever you want to call it. And that led almost immediately to my personal physical freedom, financial freedom. It was really very fascinating to me. And maybe some other time we could talk about that or do another show about that. But what we're talking about, and the Vanguard Visionaries focus is on the Great Awakening. And there's a bifurcation going on among humanity right now that we, as spiritual pundits, for many, many, many years have been talking about it. It's been prophesized, a split. There's the ascending humanity, and then there's descending humanity, or to put it a different way, those who do not want to change, that do not want to open their minds to change, those who do not want to open their hearts to change, okay, and want to stay with the old materialistic paradigms and gathering money and things and power over others and social stratification, etc. So which leads to my first question. So what you're saying is that this great awakening to truth, the global movement towards seeking truth that we're currently experiencing, is actually more of a great awakening, ideally at least, to our true spiritual soul essence, our true selves, versus, quote, just the truth of the systems of limitation, of human law, some people call of enslavement, that we've been controlled by for thousands of years, if not longer, and especially regarding, for example, the financial system. And the other caveat to that question is, well, we'll get to that in question number 4.
Okay.
So do you believe that this great awakening really fundamentally is more about human beings awakening not just to the systems of enslavement and the law and all of that geopolitical kind of stuff, but more so on a grander scale and from a higher perspective to our true self?
Yes, is the short answer. So you've alluded to these three parts of the body, the mind, and the spirit. And I think it's Carl Jung talked about having a third birth. The first birth is when we pop out of our mother. Second birth is when we come into the world and we learn how the world works. And the third one is this spiritual awakening. There may be some refinements in what he talked about in terms of how we engage with what you might call the opponent, right? There are forces in the world that want to kind of pull us back down again. And many of us have come to understand the system admiralty or maritime law, which ties us with a false identity back through our birth certificate to a dead corporation or a trust.
Lost at sea, I've heard.
Right. And administers us as if we're cargo on a ship. Now, there are other people who are better equipped than I am to talk about the nature of that system of oppression and the details of it. I've gone into the courts enough to go, hang on a minute, this really is real. And they really don't care at all about a constitution or about love or morality or anything, right? It's however, that's not the whole story. Now, we can obviously be enslaved through the physical means, the body. And if you ask a child to talk about slavery, they'll tend to draw pictures of chains and shackles and being out in the cane fields. Um, what we've had to deal with in the last few years is it becoming far more obvious that we have a system of mental slavery, and we've been programmed culturally and in other ways, biologically even, with chemicals in our environment, and that affects how we think. And that's great. We can understand that there's deceptions and lies we've been told, and we can let go of some of those. What I'm finding is there's this third bucket, which is becoming conscious of the final ends to which we are directed. Um, and even words like worship I found can make many people feel very uncomfortable, partly because they have been so abused by religious institutions. But we all worship something. Everything we do has a final end to it. So to give an example, something like gossiping, is character assassination. So it's the spirit of gossip is murderous. Yeah. Now, is someone killed? No, but it has a spirit, which is that final thing it heads towards. So there's a consciousness that we slowly develop as to what ends we are ultimately serving. And there's a language around it, which I've had to slowly acquire, and terminology like covenants, which I just ignored for decades. But now it's suddenly, hang on a minute. I'm going into these courts and these environments that are supposed to be about truth and morality and justice and fairness. And my little illusions about what's really going on have all just fallen apart. So I'm forced to engage with this bigger toolkit of, hang on a minute, what is it these people in these courts actually worship? And I had an experience in one court where it was about council tax. And the magistrate said to me, "We're here to collect money." Out loud. Okay, well, at least he's honest. He's here
Yeah.
to serve mammon, not God. Yeah. It's uh but what I've noticed is there's a lot of people out there who are attempting to get to bend this system to their own will. Yeah, if only I get the right number of affidavits out there and I put the right stickers on the envelopes and in the right colored ink and with the right incantations and notice to agent is notice to principal, that eventually they'll behave themselves. No, no, they're in the business of slavery. They don't care. They own the system. It's their system. It's not there to emancipate you. You're there to emancipate yourself. Yeah, it's and that for me has been quite. I had to go there and experience the iniquity in the system and its unfairness and injustice to really get it. It had to become visceral in my own life. I have to have actual fake debt collectors turning up at my own door who won't stop no matter what the law says in order to kind of get it. And then watching other friends who are engaged in all kinds of interesting legal battles, and they're looking for an escape from this. If the devil can't take you out, he wears you out, and we're all experiencing it. Okay, how do we get out of this? It isn't a question of just picking up some massive book about trust law and equity and filing more claim forms in courts. The only way to win is not to play. So how do we stop playing? And that's where watching the baptism thing or the immersion starts to all make sense to me.
Okay.
So,
That's excellent. I'm really happy that you shared your own personal process of experience and what that experience was showing you.
right,
And also one thing that I'd like to point out that something that you mentioned is that your friends are also looking for an escape. And
right,
what they're looking for as escape, though, is from what you termed in the article. You said, okay, because all these systems are based upon our identity as physical creatures, or as physical human beings, as bodies, and egos as individualized, separate egos and bodies. It's all separation consciousness. All these law systems are based on complete and utter separation consciousness. there is no unity. And the entire philosophy and foundation of these systems is absolutely, not just duality, but complete separation consciousness. And as I'll quote you, the revelation of the flesh, material, and money. And so all of these things are actually physical. Flesh meaning pleasure, material, the accumulation of physical things, toys, machines, things, jets, cars, houses, etc. And of course, money, financial power, which also money as an energy translates into power over others. And also, of course, political power, because if you got enough money, you could just, buy as you have been discovered, you can control to some extent most of the courts and attorneys and et cetera in the land. So the way out, which we can get to now or talk about it, is not through a physical liberation, becoming a free man on the land or becoming a legal sovereign, but becoming a sovereign soul, becoming a spiritual sovereign, and discovering your true essence and self, and right. Identifying with that, which is the goal, the purpose throughout all history. All the luminaries and philosophers and religious leaders, the sincere ones at least, all talk about that, identifying yourself as a child of God, as or a term similar to that, as a child, as a spiritual being. So what I'd like you to do first, please, is, because you mentioned submission to divine will versus, just trying to liberate yourself, or divine laws, to liberate yourself from human law. So could you please define, for those in the audience that may not be clear about that difference and what that means, could you please define your perspective on divine law and divine sovereignty, okay, and etc.
So let's first give you the context as to why is this divine will versus self-will thing important, and then delve into trying to define what those things might be. Okay. So the context is that we can all be selfish, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we do wicked things to other people. We could be selfish, for example, just in which partners we have in life. Yeah, it's who we make children with. You solve a problem for me. But whether we are actually aligned and trying to pursue higher righteous goals in life may or may not be true. So what places like these courts are doing is they're reconciling conflicts between people who are pursuing their self-will. If they weren't pursuing their self-will and they're in harmony, they wouldn't need to go to court. So the courts are providing a service. It isn't justice, it's finality. It takes things from being very, very long and slow and violent and makes them short and quick, yeah, relatively. It's so the reason we have the courts, the reason the job they're doing is to administer us as effectively a slave class to our own pursuit of pleasure and status and money and whatever it is. Yeah, it's rather than the pursuit of righteousness. Because we refuse to enslave ourselves to the pursuit of righteousness, the courts come along and say, well, you are a slave. Just that you're not a slave in mind or body necessarily. They may do that too, but you're a slave in spirit. So we're going to treat you as a slave in spirit. And it's your choice to be a slave in spirit. What on earth are you doing here? Yeah, it's because we've been unable to reconcile things between us outside of the courts, right? So the courts are not necessarily doing something wicked by treating us like slaves. Yeah, hang on, right? But we assume that they are. They must be, surely. They're administering us like cargo. And, well, yes, they are also engaged in fraud and treason, and that's wrong. But not everything they're doing is wrong. And to condemn everything they're doing from that perspective is very unhelpful. So what is this divine will thing? I think we partly learn it through paradox, which is, it's a bit like enlightenment, is after you've screwed up so many times, whatever's left might be enlightenment. Yeah. So we learn the divine will thing by bouncing around in life and realizing actually, and the classic example is like marriage. is that we've had these relationships and divorces and car crashes. Why was that? Well, it's because we were acting in a self-interested or maybe narcissistic type of mindset. Uh, and in particular, the narcissistic side of it. So the whole court world is what a narcissist is. It's not someone who has massive self-love. That's not the case. It's someone who lacks a true self-identity, and therefore they construct a false identity, and they'll do almost anything, no matter how wicked, to maintain that false identity. So it's not an excess of self; it's a deficit of self, and that's why the narcissists behave as they do.
Oh, that's a really excellent point. That's a really excellent point. Yes. And
Right.
so they have to prop up the ego self, the false self, the persona, as Carl Jung would call it, because they actually lack a true identity of any real self, to even within themselves.
Right.
That's a really interesting perspective.
So
Wonderful.
it isn't the body, there's the body self. There's that false self, the persona. Then there's the spiritual self. Well, what is that? Yeah, it's
Right.
uh, so I think that the divine will is it starts with the base of it all is being able to identify with the world as it actually is, yeah, and to be able to see the world for what it is. Uh, and we start to do the right kind of works. We start to do the right kind of words in the world. But it's a process of this ascension thing, and then we start to pay attention to, hang on a minute, I'm not the first person to have these struggles with my works and my words and my world. So where's that Bible thing? I'll put it around here somewhere. Yeah, I got all these Bible bashing friends, some of whom seem to have fewer problems than me. So maybe they figure something out before me. Yeah, it's and you start to realize, hang on a moment, is some of there's patterns here, and they're eternal patterns. They don't go away. And and actually the problems I've got have already been described. Maybe I should go and read the manual eventually. So that there's wisdom in there. But then the level above that is the worship thing. Well, what is it I'm worshiping? Is it myself? So am I being the arbiter here of what's true and what's righteous? Or am I accepting that what's true and what's moral is defined somewhere out there? Call it God, yeah. And in which case, what am I going to? Which one am I choosing? Yeah, it's where am I going to submit myself?
Yes. Or there's another option, which I explored myself many years ago, and that is maybe maybe it's both. Because when you identify with spirit and soul, then you are identifying with your true essence, your eternal essence. Then you're starting to stop identifying with the physical body, the temporary vehicle
Right.
in the world. And so there you can start to see how the dichotomy between the persona, the ego self, and the divine divinity in a
Yeah.
general sense begins to, when you leave the one behind and start identifying with your higher divine self, then your moral, the place you look for moral ethical guidance, you could say both my true self and God, the divine self. And because you see how those two can be parallel, to use a word that many people may not, you know, resist.
Right.
And that is in the, even in the Christian Bible, Jesus said, I am the Son of God and you are all my brothers and sisters. So I am a child of God, but so are you. I mean, he in the
Right.
Bible, it is there.
So
But regardless, let's take a short pause because of the system that I'm using right now, and we'll continue this in a few minutes. Okay, and we're back after our pause. Um, And I would, so let's start out with what we were talking about before. But first, I would like to talk about my shirt. I purposely wore this shirt, which I got as a gift. And it starts out with life. Oh, it's activated by sunlight, by the way. So you can only see it after the sunlight hits it, UV light, I suppose. Life, healing, sunlight, nature, harmony, and spirit. I wanted to read what's on it because it parallels exactly what we're talking about today. Especially life and spirit. What is life and what is spirit, and who are we in relation to these things and in relation to this world? So we were discussing the fact that the last that I recall, we were discussing that you mentioned that the justification, the possible justification for the court system and the law system to be treating us as cargo lost at sea, etc., as physical things versus sovereign entities, divine spirit-based entities. So I just wanted to give you the opportunity to define that. That's maybe why we're defined through our birth certificates as dead, lost at sea, in the waters. You mentioned amniotic fluid in your article, and if you could just maybe flesh out those thoughts and explain, and then how this perspective could lead to a reconciliation of sorts, and give us a release from the anger that we have, so many of us. Some of us rage, like rage against the machine, the rage we have felt against these systems. So, yeah, go for it.
Okay,
Wonderful
so let's
information.
have a little thought experiment for a moment. Okay, you're a Buddhist monk or a Taoist, whatever, and you go to London, and you suddenly find yourself hauled up in court, right? It's and you go, hang on a minute, I've got a really good map of the world here. I really understand how the world works. My works in the world are all very virtuous and righteous. Yeah, why you've got me in this court? My words are all wonderful. Yeah, I studied so much wisdom, and yeah, it's like uh, and you think, hey, it doesn't make sense. Why are you treating me as this body of cargo in your system still? Surely I've risen above it. No, you haven't actually. It's like now all those things are right? It's like yes, understanding the world, how it works, having the right words and having the right actions in the world, picking up on this wisdom. It's not. There's nothing wrong with any of that, right? In fact, they're essential. They're intrinsic to how we grow spiritually. But so it's necessary, but not sufficient, right? Is and it's the last little step of worship that's the catch, right? Is that the reason why we keep being dragged under the law is that even in that, imagine you've got a Buddhist country, it could be Myanmar, right? It's like and there's strife. Hang on a minute, we're all Buddhists. How come there's strife in a Buddhist country, right? Maybe we haven't got enough people with the right robes on. We need to regulate the robes, and I think we need to insist that now that 3-year-olds start meditating for 4 hours a day because we clearly haven't got enough peace and harmony yet. It's like and we need to change our how much rice we're eating. Is that people aren't fasting enough. So you start to introduce all of these religious rules, laws, connotations, administrative functions, roles into the system, and that religious world, which ultimately manifests itself as the Admiralty Law, is taking the real and turning it into the unreal, right? It takes the physical, the embodied, and makes fictions out of it. It's like the birth certificate. And there's this middle bit, which it tilts things out of balance, which is that it takes a status and turns it into a title. So a good example of this might be with marriage, yeah, is that there's some friends I've got who say we're not married. because they haven't been to in front of a priest and said some vows, but they've been together for decades and they'll never leave each other and they've got kids. Yeah, of course they're married, right? They're just not. They've got the status of marriage, but not the title. Yeah, it's there's other people I know who have been they've put up with each other for decades. If you said they're married, then they would say, "Of course we are. We got married in 1960, whatever." Yeah. But actually, they're not really married to each other. They're not truly wedded to each other because their spirits are not the same. Yeah. So what the legal system does is, over time, it tends to convert the statuses into titles, or the substance into form. And the space for administrating stuff grows and grows and grows. And whether it starts off with it starts off with canon law, and you end up with car tax, administrative law. But it's that whole system. So even if you're applying really good spiritual wisdom in the world, right, until you take one final step and then spiritually are reborn, you're still in the system. Yeah, you're just a very wise bodied slave. Yeah, very, very well behaved slave. Yeah, it's that's the attitude they're taking. So it's not my job to proselytize for Christian ministry or whatever, but there's a few things I picked up from Bible passages from other people going down this path. And there's one I want to just, it's very, very, very short, which is Romans 7:6. It says, "But now we are released from the law, having died to that which held us captive, so that we serve in the new way of the Spirit and not in the old way of the written code." So there's other passages in talking about how the letter is all dead. It's the spirit that matters. And even if we engage in meditation, martial arts, right thinking, Tai Chi, whatever, anything, it's got an embodied mind and body aspect to it. And eventually some bastard will come and regulate us. Yeah. We're not really freed until we say, no, I'm not under that law. I'm not going to let you regulate my meditation sessions to make me more peaceful. Yeah, because that's what they're trying to do. Even here, my Newcastle City Council, they're trying to financially destroy me and take my travel away for clean air zone because I've got the wrong shape of vehicle. Yeah, because it's a van shape rather than a saloon or a hatchback shape, they want money off me. Hang on, that's crazy. That doesn't have any relationship to clean air, right? But that's way down in the little administrative function, but it's ultimately a spiritual problem. And I kind of am in their system, right? It's now, if you my friends have gone off and been immersed, they're saying, actually, I don't worship that. I'm living by faith, not by that law. Now, of course, if you do wrong things, you're not living in the covenant of the faith, and therefore you have put yourself back under the law. So don't be surprised. Yeah, it's and you may be persecuted for saying, actually, I'm now governed by faith and not by your law. So it's not a get out of jail free card for court either. However, when we all say we're not governed by the law, we're governed by faith, the law is obsolete. It's not that we're above the law, we're just beyond it. It's not relevant to us anymore because we found that place of harmony. But the harmony isn't just yes, we do need to pursue wise ways of being in the world. Yeah, and it's the same wisdom whether it's in Taoism or Buddhism or in the Bible about how to find peace in the ordinary world. Yeah? It's like be with your neighbor. But there's an extra thing, and this is the thing, the aha moment. Aha! Now, why the immersion? What it is the third birth, and why has the church bastardized it? So they've taken away all the living water from the churches, replaced it with spritzing babies, not adults who are making a free will choice. It's all spiritual abuse, right? Well, when you go out into a lake or a plunge pool of a waterfall or the sea, what you're accepting is the level of that water is divinely set for you. You don't get to set it, yeah? It's just there. You're
Ah,
accepting God given, something is God given.
yes.
the level of the
Yeah,
water.
yeah, and like here in Costa Rica, I've in Costa Rica now for decades, and yes, I mean the attraction of the tourists and most people, they go to the waterfalls, they go to
Right,
the lakes, they go to
right.
the
And you're a surfer,
100 meters from a beautiful, a calm gulf, and that
right?
those are the real living waters. So yeah, I do
Right. So,
completely get that. I'm a
so
surfer too, so yeah,
right.
the most sacred,
So,
some of the most sacred moments in my entire life, experiences, direct experiences of creation, of nature, have been in the ocean, surfing these beautiful, pristine, natural waves of pure energy, natural
it
energy.
just turns up. Yeah, it's magic, right?
Yeah,
So it's that flow of the universe that we're aligning to.
yeah,
That's why it has to be living water, is we're just
yeah.
saying I'm going with the flow. Doesn't mean I'm going along to get along. So if someone else starts to dam up the flow and misdirect it and misuse it, I'm going to attack that dam, yeah? But in the general scheme of things, I'm literally going with the flow.
The
So
real flow, the living flow of life, of the universe,
yeah, I
of the
worship
multiverse,
the,
of
the,
the
the
divine, of
force.
creation. Yes.
Yeah, the force that gives life. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
that's my God. Yeah, is whatever created this. That's what I worship.
Yes.
And that life force rather than the dead letter of the law.
Life
So
force, life. Yes.
right, so
Real
so
life,
that's why I
true
go,
life, eternal life.
there's so people have been we had a little chat offline whilst the power was being rebooted, and yeah, I got abused by Jehovah's Witnesses, you got abused by Catholics. Other people have been abused in all kinds of other sects and denominations and cults, whatever. But they're all misdirecting people away from the simplicity of this idea of immersion and covenant. Yeah, is covenant is not quotes God's law. It's getting out of man's law, yeah, and being into something living by faith, which naturally brings the harmony, but it requires the rebirth of our spirit, and just a simple matter of intent. And the it's not a ritual going into the water, it's something else. Yeah, it's a ritual is just another religious thing to be governed. So they've taken the substance, literally the substance of living water and immersion, and turned it into the form of baptism and giving you a title certificate that's all fake. Yeah, there's no real spiritual rebirth happening there.
Which touches on something you said earlier, which is that what they've done is taken us and these concepts out of the territory and put them on a map.
Right,
Which
right,
is the map is,
right,
as you've heard before, the map is not the territory, but they
right.
try to make everything a map, which is an art.
Hallelujah. So
Yeah,
that's
which is
it,
an
right?
artificial image, two-dimensional image of what actually is a third
But
dimensional, actually a
but
higher dimensional actual territory.
right,
Can
so we're
I
doing this.
let me propose a phrase to you and say that what the key is to embrace our move away from the ego, the persona, the identification. See, I wrote an article many years ago, about 14, 15 years ago, called Identity Crisis. And
Yeah,
it's very short. It's in my old blog, which is at waverider1.wordpress.com. And I'll put it in the section below these videos. But what I talk about is that we need to stop because we are spiritual beings having a human experience, not human beings having a spiritual experience. Those few of us that have been having spiritual
yeah,
experiences. So, what my perspective on this is that what we need to do is to move away from identifying with the physical self, although we do need to take care of that physical body, vehicle, whatever you want to
yeah,
see it as, in this world so that we can get food to eat and shelter and such like that. Okay, however, the identification needs to be on our eternal soul self, God self, spiritual self. And that way we move out of
right,
under that law of the material human law and into identification with that and into worship of that which is natural, that which is God, that which is spiritual,
right.
that which is eternal. And how about that?
So it's a yes and, right, which is we have to remember there's this parallel world of the Romans, the Babylonians, the Phoenicians with their wretched laws, okay? And they're gonna, no matter how much we try to ascend in, how much wisdom we take on, and whether we go from orange belt to, whatever, yellow belt to black belt, whatever, they're going to find a way to suck us back into their law, right? We're going to regulate belts and the material of belts and how often you practice your martial arts. Yeah, something will come along. And what we have to do is an extra step, which is to say, I'm not part of your system of worship. Yeah, it's that in the absence of Babylonians, Romans, Phoenicians, whatever, with their wretched law, then that merely practicing the right vibes would get us there, but we aren't in that world, right? So I think what the Bible stuff is telling us is actually there are Romans, a lot of Romans around, aren't there? Yeah, and this is how we deal with the Roman problem too. Yeah, it's like it's or the Judaic, Talmudic, whatever law that we're being sucked into. So it's how do you free yourself from needing these laws that treat you as objects and chattel or whatever, because they have to, because they can't, they can't see you as a full spiritual being. You have to choose to be governed by something else, and you have to make an explicit choice. And I am going to be governed by faith in the flow of, well, whatever. Yeah, it's like it's that's the thing. And because we are failing to take that extra step, we're being sucked back into the law, over and over again.
So
And
now,
at some point, they'll say you can't do immersions in that pool of living water over there. Yeah, they'll try to regulate going into the sea, walking into the sea. They'll try to expand the law to everything. Yeah, it's that's totalitarian. So and that's just how it works. It will try to expand its scope. So this is how we
okay, so I have
we bound it.
I have two questions,
Yeah.
and then we can close on these two questions.
Yeah.
One, in your experience and your knowledge, and how would one go about doing that? Would that need to be a public statement or some signed document or something along those lines? And then the other question is that we can close with is in order to help maybe people look at their systems from a different perspective and realize that it's just part of their job and the way they are programmed to be the totalitarians, is that is everything that they've done for the past many thousands of years to keep us in line and oppressed, etc., has that provided us as spiritual beings on this planet an incentive and an impetus for us to first seek our true selves, and secondly, to identify with and embrace our true selves, like a motivation? Because as you and I probably, I mean, I know this, most people, if they are given their total freedom and financial freedom, then they're concerned, they would stop seeking a spiritual solution to anything. And they say, I got my iPhone, I got my car, I got my house, I'm okay. I got vacations every year. Why do I need to go go on a spiritual quest? So the two questions, how does one go about embracing that and converting oneself or immersing oneself? And number two, and moving into that divine law. And number two, do you believe that, I mean, there are no excuses, right? Okay, I'm not talking about, blanket forgiveness for all these horrible things they've done to us, but is that maybe a higher justification for what they have done?
Okay, so the first part is the idea of sin is not just what you're drinking and shagging around, right? It's opposition to divine will. So it's the self-will that we operate our lives from. So the way you do it is the only witness you need is Big G. You don't need anyone else around, right? You don't need any ritual, you don't need any priest. You just have to immerse yourself, go under the water and be reborn and say, I am now governed by divine will. That's it, right? That's my intent. I'm not the God, I'm not the savior, I'm just Martin. I'm going to identify with that one. Yeah, it's like and I'm now a slave to righteousness, not to my own bodily desires, whatever. So it's not, take the religious part out. There's no religion, right? It's not required. Now you can have witnesses so that you can take it into a court of law and say, we're not in your system anymore. Sorry, But they may put you in jail for it, and apparently they crucify people too, right? It's
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's on them, not on you, right? So you've got a clean conscience. Freedom is not. There's a freedom in mind and body which lets us just go. You know, you win the lottery, and suddenly you can go off on you know you can hire a lot of coke and hookers, yeah. But that isn't freedom, right? It's that's merely turbocharging your own self-will. So the freedom is the freedom from the tyranny of your self-will.
Like
Right?
say
It's
the ego self, the selfish self, the little self.
the enslavement to your own mind and body desires. Yeah, it's not that all the being hungry is fine, but it's the enslavement to that thing that's the problem. So
And there's
uh,
a difference between being hungry and then wanting only the best chocolate imported from,
right, absolutely, and
Switzerland.
being unable to function without it. I saw some poor guy. I saw it being a multi-millionaire property developer in New York, and he was down to his last $8,500 whatever dollars, and he was going to commit suicide or whatever. It's like, I wish I had $8,500. I haven't had that for
Yeah,
years.
really.
So, and
So
for
relative.
him, he's a multi-millionaire, and suddenly he's got $8,500, and the world's ending. It's I mean,
Insane.
I'm not in that. I'm not in that place, right? So you become enslaved to the material, and when it's taken away from you, it's disaster. Whereas if you're enslaved to the divine will, well, it can't be taken. You can be put in prison. You can be tortured. They can't take it off you, right?
That's
It's
right. That's right.
uh,
Absolutely. Yes, and I've discovered that on a very, very personal level over the past 15 years. Yes. So now, how about the other part about that they, meaning the totalitarians, the dictators, the aristocratic families, the oligarchs, they have served a purpose to push us towards this spiritual quest and awakening throughout the centuries, throughout the millennia. And again, I'm not remotely attempting to justify their behavior. No, absolutely not. However, I am saying that it's possible internally, in order for us to achieve inner peace and inner harmony, the one thing that is absolutely necessary, as a former life coach and spiritual guide, I know this, is to let go of the rage of the anger at these people, who the vast majority of us have never met in our lives and never will. Okay, these them out there that are oppressing, that are the billionaires and the aristocratic families who own BlackRock and all these Microsoft, et cetera, et cetera. A mechanism for us to release our anger at them, and they're just as much slaves in the matrix as we have.
right.
Okay,
If not more so, because
if not
spiritually they're
more so,
enslaved.
because they're threatened to say, you don't do what we say, and we're going to take your child and do very horrible, nasty things to them, which they already do to many of their children already.
All these people doing that stuff are all slaves.
Right.
They might have palaces, but they're spiritually enslaved. They're enslaved to the opposition to righteousness. It's the worst possible place to be.
Yeah, and they are used as mechanisms of enforcement, and also the Hollywood stars, and music stars. They're saying you need to do this, or we will not allow you to become a big star. So there's a lot of mechanisms there that we're not going to get into, but to see that the controllers are also slaves and have been always, and that they have played a role, because without an incentive, human beings, generally speaking, are pretty lazy, and especially if they're very comfortable, physically, in a physical way. And it basically, if everybody was given like this RV, Jasara Nasara thing, everybody's given $1 million today, how many of them, what percentage would continue their spiritual quest? So, let's let you go with that one.
Back to the Bible, there's a parable of it's the prodigal son, right? Now, this person got, there was all kinds of things that happened and went wayward, and wasted all the money, ended up in a pigsty, came back, It's But it's not the parable of the murdered son or the extinct species, or yeah. So we can maybe accept that there's some adversity in life and temptation and things that help us to grow, but we can't justify pure wickedness on the basis that it might as a side effect deliver some learning opportunities. That doesn't really work, right? So there's a difference between
Agreed.
problematic, lack of righteousness and lack of virtue, which takes us astray, and absolute active planned malevolence and genocide and torture and abominations, chimeras and all other kind of stuff that goes on, right? That's a no-no. I don't think we can use that as a basis for which to seek to spiritually grow. Right? There is
Like
a
I
path to
said, I
find for
know
us.
I'm not in any way justifying any
Yeah,
of that
yeah.
because that's that's crossing the line way,
So,
way too far. It's totally
so
unnecessary.
that's why we have to refocus ourselves on our own little world and our own little lives and following the way and submitting
Yes,
ourselves to divine will, and leave that to other people.
yes,
Military
perfect.
job.
And that's taking responsibility for our own growth, our own path, our own awakening,
Yeah.
and working on ourselves. Absolutely. So I couldn't agree more. And that is the path. Now, I do want to leave with a quote that ties in to all of this, actually. And it's a quote I put at the top of it's a Afterglow, an article I wrote about oof, reaching reaching ecstatic divine bliss.
Mm.
And I would like to mention it because it is from ancient Buddhism, and it's very simple. I am paraphrasing. So, but the way is not in the sky. The way is in the heart.
Mm.
And so, what that means is that, like we talked about in the beginning, is that the way is not through the intellect, the way is not through the head, the way is not through the man's laws and trying to navigate all these things about the taxes and the court system and all these different
Yeah.
things. No, the way is through the heart. And there's a book that I read many, many years ago called The Seat of the Soul. And it says the seat of the soul is right here, what people in spiritual circles call the heart chakra area. And then other people say maybe the third eye, I'm not sure, but the physical connection, etc. But regardless, okay, the way is through spirit, through the spiritual heart. And so, would you like to make any comments about
I hear that also. Uh, some people have a lot of darkness in their heart, so we have to be careful of venerating our own desires, feelings. Now, it's not to deny that our heart is our center of like lovingness and connection,
in that sense? That's
and that is the consciousness that we're seeking. Yes, it's like no question of it. Uh, it's back to these wretched Romans or the deceivers or people who want to swap form and substance to get us back under the law in some way or get us to take a title. Hello, Mr. Smith. Mr. I'm not Mr. Yeah, that's the title. Yeah, where did that come from? I'm just Martin. Yeah, it's like uh, so we have to recognize that there are active like opponents in the world trying to deceive us and subvert us and pull us back into the false morality and false logic of their legal system, where everything we followed all the letter of the law. We must be doing the righteous thing. Yeah, it's no, right? So there's a little danger in elevating the heart because we sometimes don't want the right things, yeah, and we fall in love with the wrong things. So that could possibly enslave us back to our own desires. And that's why we look up. Yeah, it's look in as well. That's part of understanding the terrain, but we have to look up too, and that's recognizing that the governance of our own desires come from outwith.
okay. All right. Is there any other final comments you'd like to make?
Um, this is all work in progress. Yeah, and uh, and I'm like many people having to unpick what's the underlying spiritual message here from all the religious indoctrination and even the Bible texts have been allegedly tampered with, whatever. It's like this is not easy. So
Big time.
often we're pushing on people's buttons in terms of their background and whatever, what upbringing they had, and it's quite hard to be able to step back and say, okay, what's really going on here? And we've each got different language and experience. So we're all kind of trying to find the way, and it takes a while to become conscious of our own biases and our own underlying belief systems, particularly with spiritual. So
I
if
have a
I,
saying I heard many years ago that, sorry to interrupt, I just have a saying
yeah,
that might summarize that whole attitude, which is, and including with this chat, take the best and leave the rest.
right.
So
And that's why I think the Anons at the moment are the best, and they're becoming effectively the new priest class. That's what's happening.
the Anons. Oh, okay. Interesting. Okay. All right. Well, we'll leave it at that. And I thank you very much and appreciate your time.